At 66, I thought I knew every detail of the woman with whom I'd shared 42 years of marriage. I thought the secrets between us had been buried decades ago, dissolved by time and the routine of a shared life. But on that September morning, when I found the yellow envelope hidden between the pages of her New World Translation, I discovered that my wife was keeping something that would change everything I believed about our family. The envelope was there, carefully folded, as if it had been opened and closed hundreds of times. Inside were worn photographs and a handwritten letter in a script I didn't immediately recognize. My hands trembled as I held those papers, sitting on the edge of our bed, listening to the sound of the shower in the bathroom. She was humming one of the kingdom songs she always sang at meetings. My Lorraine, always so devout, always so correct in her Christian conduct. But those photographs told a different story. A story she had buried for 4 decades, protected by silence and the doctrine that preached the forgetting of the worldly past. I looked at that young face in the photo, at those eyes I knew so well, and felt my world collapse like the walls of Jericho in the biblical stories she loved so much. I never imagined I would reach this point. I never thought that, after so many years serving side by side in the Kingdom Hall, attending assemblies, knocking on doors on Saturday mornings, I would discover that my wife had lived a whole life before me. A life she chose to erase, following the elders' guidance about leaving the old system of things behind. The sound of the shower stopped. She would be coming out of the bathroom in a few minutes, and I would need to decide what to do with that truth that now burned in my hands like hot coal. My name is Walter Brennan, and throughout my adult life, I have been known as a man of unwavering faith. I married Lorraine in 1983, in a simple ceremony at the Kingdom Hall of our congregation in Portland, Oregon. She had been baptized only 2 years before, a fervent convert who had quit her waitressing job to dedicate herself to full-time service. I was a ministerial servant at the time, proud to have found a companion who shared my love for Jehovah and the organization. We built our life on the pillars the Watchtower Society taught us. We woke up at 5:30 every morning to read the daily text. We attended midweek and weekend meetings without fail. We dedicated 70 hours a month to field service, knocking on doors, distributing the Watchtower and Awake magazines, talking to people on the streets about the coming kingdom. Our house was an example of theocratic order, as the elders liked to say. We never had children. Lorraine said she preferred to dedicate her time to Jehovah's service, that children would be a distraction from the more important work ahead of us. I accepted this decision because I trusted her, because the elders told us we were in the last days and there was no time to lose with worldly concerns. We focused our energy on serving the congregation, on helping new students, on keeping our spiritual house clean and prepared for the great tribulation to come. But now, holding that envelope, I understood that there might have been other reasons for her choice. Reasons she never shared with me, protected by layers of doctrine and enforced silence. Before I continue with this story, I need to ask something of you who are listening. If this story is touching your heart, if you feel you need to hear what I have to say, please subscribe to this channel. Leave your like so more people can know the truth I discovered. And in the comments, tell me what city you're watching from. I want to know that I'm not alone, that there are others out there who understand the weight of discovering that the person closest to you has kept secrets for an entire lifetime. Your participation means a lot to an old man like me, trying to make sense of what he's found. Now, let me take you through the events that unfolded in the days after my discovery. Let me tell you how the truth, the one we were always told would set us free, can also destroy us. When Lorraine came out of the bathroom that morning, she found me sitting on the bed with the envelope in my hands. Her face, still damp from the shower steam, instantly paled. I saw panic cross her blue eyes, those same eyes that had looked at me with love and devotion for over 4 decades. For the first time in our marriage, I saw my wife completely exposed, without the armor of her faith to protect her. She didn't say anything for a long moment. She just stood there, the towel wrapped around her thin body, her hands clutching the edge as if it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. I also remained silent, because I didn't know where to start. How do you confront someone you thought you knew completely? How do you ask the right questions when you don't even know what questions to ask? It was she who broke the silence. Her voice came out low, almost a whisper, laden with a weight I had never heard before. She said she needed to get dressed, that we needed to talk, but that I should promise not to make any rash decisions. I nodded, unable to form words. I watched as she grabbed her clothes and went back to the bathroom. The door closed softly, and I was left there, holding those photographs as if they were evidence of a crime. The images showed a Lorraine I had never known. A girl of perhaps 18 or 19, with long, loose hair falling over her shoulders, wearing clothes I'd never seen her wear in all our years together. Tight jeans, low-cut blouses, a wide, carefree smile that seemed to belong to someone else. But what disturbed me most was the presence of a baby in some of the photos. A small child, no more than a few months old, nestled in her arms. And in the photos where the baby didn't appear, there was a man beside her, a young man with dark hair and a confident smile, his arm possessively around her waist. My mind raced, trying to process what those images meant. Had Lorraine had a child? Had she been married before? Why had she never told me? Throughout all those years of meetings, Bible studies, conversations about honesty and transparency as fundamental Christian values, she kept this secret locked in her heart. And I, the fool I was, never questioned it, never looked. I simply accepted the story she presented to me when we met. A woman who found the truth after years of worldly life, who left her past behind to serve Jehovah. She returned from the bathroom 15 minutes later, dressed in one of her modest skirts and a long-sleeved blouse. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, as she always wore it. The armor was back in place. She sat in the chair next to the bed, keeping her distance, as if she feared I might explode at any moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she laced them in her lap. I started by asking the most obvious question. Who was the child in the photos? She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, and then began to speak. Her voice was controlled, but I could feel the repressed emotions behind every word. She told me she had a son when she was just 19, the result of a relationship with a boy she met in high school. They had married quickly, pressured by their families, but the marriage lasted less than 2 years. The boy, Joshua, had stayed with his father when they separated. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. My wife had been a mother. She had abandoned a child. How was that possible? How could someone simply leave a child behind and never mention his existence? My voice came out louder than I intended when I asked how she could do that, how she could hide something so important from me. Lorraine began to cry then, silent tears streaming down her face as she explained. When she found the Jehovah's Witnesses at 23, she was emotionally destroyed. The divorce had been traumatic. The loss of custody of her son had left her in pieces. She drank too much, worked jobs she hated, lived in a miserable apartment on the wrong side of town. It was a witness who knocked on her door who changed everything. The Bible studies gave her hope, she said. The promise of a new world, of eternal life in paradise, of leaving behind all the pain and suffering of the old system of things. But when she expressed interest in being baptized, the elders told her something that would change the course of her life. They explained that, to truly become a new person in Christ, she would need to leave behind everything that linked her to her worldly past, especially if those links could interfere with her devotion to Jehovah. The conversation continued for hours that morning. We missed the field service meeting for the first time in years, something unthinkable in our rigidly structured routine. Lorraine told me details that had been buried for decades, secrets she carried alone while we built our life together. Each revelation was like tearing off a blindfold I didn't even know I was wearing. Her ex-husband, whose name was Danny, had gained full custody of Joshua because Lorraine was in a dark period of her life when they separated. She was drinking heavily, missing work, unable to adequately care for a child. The judge ruled that the boy would be better off with his father, who had remained more stable. Lorraine received visitation rights, but as she sank further into her depression, the visits became more and more sporadic and painful. When the witnesses entered her life, she saw a chance for a new beginning. The weekly studies with a sister from the local congregation gave her structure. The meetings provided her with community. The doctrine offered her clear answers in a world that seemed chaotic and meaningless. She stopped drinking, got a better job, moved to a decent apartment. For the first time in years, she felt she had a purpose. But then came the question of her son. She told me, her voice choked with emotion, how she had consulted the elders on how to proceed. Joshua was living with his father, who had remarried. The boy had a new mother, a stable life. Lorraine wanted to know if she should fight for custody again, now that she was in a better place. The elders' answer surprised her and, at the same time, offered her a path she secretly desired, even if she wouldn't admit it at the time. The elders told her that, while Jehovah valued family, she needed to consider what would be best for her spiritual devotion. They pointed to scriptures about how family ties should not interfere with the service to God. They suggested that, given that the boy was well established in a non-witness home, trying to get him back could create spiritual conflicts. Furthermore, as a full-time witness, she would need all her energy and resources for the preaching work. Raising a child alone would make that extremely difficult. What they didn't explicitly say but what was implied was that a child from a previous marriage, especially a worldly marriage, represented a connection to the old system that she should be leaving behind. The cleaner the cut, the more complete her transformation into a new creature would be. Lorraine internalized this message. She convinced herself she was making the right choice, not just for herself, but for Joshua too. The boy had a family. She had Jehovah. That's how it was meant to be. I listened to all this with a mixture of horror and disbelief. How could the elders advise a mother to abandon her child? How could Lorraine accept that advice? But the more she talked, the more I began to understand the complex web of guilt, doctrine, and trauma that had shaped her decision. She wasn't just running away from her past. She was desperate for redemption, for a way to forgive herself for the choices she had made when she was at rock bottom. After she was baptized, Lorraine cut almost all contact with her previous life. She moved cities, got a new job, dedicated herself completely to the organization. She sent birthday cards to Joshua via Danny's address, but without contact information, just generic messages wishing him well, signed simply as his birth mother. She told me she stopped even that small connection a few years before we met, following the advice that keeping those memories alive only prolonged the pain and distracted her from her service. When we met at a regional assembly, I was a dedicated ministerial servant. She was a regular pioneer. Our connection was instant, built on shared values and common devotion. During our chaperone courtship, as the organization's protocols required, she told me about her worldly past in general terms. She said she had been briefly married when young, that the marriage didn't work out, that she found the truth and started her life over. I never pressed for details. In the witness culture, someone's past before the truth was considered dead and buried. Asking too many questions could be seen as a lack of faith in Jehovah's ability to renew a person. So we married, built our life together, and Joshua remained a secret locked in her heart. She kept those photographs as the only artifacts of a life that officially no longer existed. She hid them in her Bible, the most sacred place in our home, because there she knew I would never look without permission. It was the perfect hiding place, protected by the sanctity of God's word. I sat there, processing everything, feeling as if I was meeting my wife for the first time. The woman I thought I knew was just a carefully edited version, a character built on the wreckage of who she really was. And the organization I had faithfully served for decades had facilitated that rebuilding, encouraged that erasure, sanctified that abandonment. The days that followed were the hardest of our marriage. We continued to go to meetings, keeping up appearances before the congregation. But at home, there was a heavy silence between us. I found myself looking at Lorraine during the meetings, watching her sing the songs, answer questions during the Watchtower study, and wondered who that woman really was. How many other things had she hidden? How many other truths were buried under layers of doctrine and conformity? I started asking questions I had never asked before. I asked about Joshua, where he was now, if she knew anything about his life. Lorraine admitted, with great shame, that she had no idea. She had cut contact so completely that she lost any connection. He would be about 45 now, possibly married, perhaps with children of his own. We could have grandchildren and never knew it. The idea consumed me. I started thinking about my own life, about all the choices we made in the name of the organization. We never had children because the doctrine suggested we were in the last days and that having children would be selfish when we could use that time to preach. We sacrificed careers, education, relationships with non-witness family members. All because we trusted that the organization knew what was best for us, that the elders spoke with Jehovah's authority. But now, looking back at 66, I began to question. What had we really gained? We spent decades knocking on doors, distributing magazines, sitting in endless meetings. We avoided holidays, birthdays, any celebration the organization deemed pagan. We kept distance from disfellowshipped family members, following the policy of shunning those who left the organization. And for what? The end still hadn't come. The new system wasn't here yet, and my wife had abandoned a son in the name of a devotion that now seemed hollow and cruel. I decided to do something I knew would cause trouble. I told Lorraine I wanted to look for Joshua. I wanted to know about him, see if he was okay, maybe even try to establish some kind of connection. She panicked. She said it would be impossible, that too much time had passed, that he probably hated her for abandoning him. More importantly, she feared what the congregation would think if they discovered her past. Our status in the congregation, our reputation as an exemplary couple, everything could be destroyed. But I couldn't let it go. I started searching on my own, using the little information Lorraine gave me. Danny's last name, the city where they lived when they separated, Joshua's full name. The internet made it easier than it would have been years ago. I found public records, social media profiles, snippets of information that slowly built a picture of who Joshua had become. I discovered he lived in Seattle, just a few hours away from us. He worked as a high school teacher, was married, and had 2 daughters. His social media showed a happy man, with a loving family, a fulfilling life. Nowhere was there any mention of Lorraine. It was as if she had never existed in his story. His father had remarried when Joshua was small, and that woman became his mother in every way that mattered. I showed all this to Lorraine. She cried upon seeing the photos, especially those of the granddaughters we would never know. The girls had her eyes, the same shape of face. They were living proof that she had a life before me, a life that produced consequences and legacies that continued even in her absence. For the first time, I saw my wife fully confront the weight of her choice. But even so, she begged me to leave things as they were. She said we didn't have the right to disrupt Joshua's life now, after all these years. That it would be selfish of us to show up wanting connection when she had chosen to be absent for so long. And there was the constant fear of the congregation finding out, of the elders knowing, of our whole carefully constructed world crumbling. I realized something fundamental then. Lorraine wasn't protecting Joshua by keeping her distance. She was protecting herself. Protecting her identity as an exemplary witness, her status in the congregation, the narrative she had built about herself. And the organization had facilitated that protection by encouraging the forgetting of the past, by turning a blind eye to abandoned relationships in the name of spiritual devotion. I started to see similar patterns throughout the congregation. Families destroyed by disfellowshipping, where parents hadn't spoken to children for years because the children had left the organization. Young people discouraged from seeking higher education because it could distract them from service. Marriages held together not by love, but by fear of the consequences of getting divorced. People living incomplete lives, sacrificing relationships and opportunities, all because the organization said that was what Jehovah wanted. For 40 years, I accepted all this without question. But now, with those photographs on my desk, with the knowledge of my wife's abandoned son, I could no longer ignore the cracks in the foundation of everything my life had been built on. I made a decision I knew would change everything. Without telling Lorraine, I wrote a letter to Joshua. It wasn't long or elaborate. I simply introduced myself as his biological mother's husband, explained that I had recently discovered his existence, and said I would like to talk if he was willing. I gave him my phone number and email address, and made it clear that I didn't expect anything from him, but that I felt he deserved to know that someone was thinking of him. I sent the letter to his work address at the school, hoping it would reach him directly without passing through others. Then I waited. Days turned into weeks. Lorraine noticed I was different, more distant, more thoughtful. She asked several times what was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her what I had done. I feared her reaction. I feared what it would do to our already strained marriage. The response came in an email late one night, 3 weeks after I had sent the letter. Joshua had written back. His message was cautious, full of understandable questions and emotions. He said he was shocked to receive my letter, that he never expected to hear anything related to his biological mother after all these years. There was anger in his words, but also curiosity. He wanted to know why now, after decades of silence, someone was trying to make contact. I answered honestly. I told him about finding the photographs, about discovering that my wife had a son, about realizing that a whole part of her life had been hidden from me. I explained that I wasn't trying to force anything, but that I felt he had a right to know that his biological mother was alive and, in some complicated way, thought of him. I didn't mention the Jehovah's Witnesses yet. That would come later. We exchanged emails for a few weeks. Joshua told me about his life, about growing up with his father and stepmother, about how rarely he thought about the woman who had given birth to him. He had a mother, he said, the woman who raised him, who was at every school play, every soccer game, every important moment. The woman who abandoned him was just a biological footnote in his story. His words were harsh, but fair. Lorraine had made a choice, and that choice had consequences. Joshua had built a good life without her, and he had no interest in disrupting that now. But he had questions. He wanted to know why. Why did she leave him? Why did she never try to maintain real contact? What was so important that it was worth abandoning a child? I knew I would reach this point. I couldn't continue the conversation without explaining about the Jehovah's Witnesses, about the doctrine that had shaped Lorraine's choices, about how the organization encouraged its members to cut ties with the worldly past. I wrote a long email explaining everything. Lorraine's conversion, the elders' advice, the pressure to leave behind everything that didn't serve the spiritual purpose. Joshua's response was explosive. He was furious to learn that a religious organization had essentially encouraged his mother to abandon him. He sent links to articles about Jehovah's Witnesses, about other families destroyed by the practice of disfellowshipping, about ex-members who spoke about control and manipulation. He said he understood now, but that understanding didn't mean forgiving. His mother had made a choice, religion or not, and that choice had left him without a mother for his entire childhood. I had to tell Lorraine. I couldn't hide what I was doing anymore, and Joshua deserved the chance to speak directly to her if he wanted to. Her reaction was worse than I imagined. She felt betrayed, furious that I had gone behind her back, terrified of what it would mean for our standing in the congregation. She yelled at me for the first time in our marriage, saying I had destroyed everything, that the elders would find out, that we would be marked. But amidst the anger, I saw something else. I saw fear. Not just fear of organizational consequences, but fear of confronting what she had done. For decades, she had pushed the guilt down, covered it with layers of doctrine and rationalization. Now, with Joshua potentially back in her life, even if only through emails, she would have to look directly at that choice and deal with its consequences. I suggested she write to him, that she at least try to explain, apologize, acknowledge the pain she had caused. Lorraine resisted for days, but finally relented. Her letter to Joshua was painful to read, full of apologies, explanations that sounded hollow even to me, pleas for understanding. She tried to explain the doctrine, the advice she received, how lost she was at the time. But in the end, it all sounded like exactly what it was, excuses for an abandonment that no doctrine could fully justify. Joshua responded, but his words were cold. He thanked her for finally acknowledging what she had done, but made it clear that he was not interested in developing a relationship. He had a family, a life, and there was no room in it for the woman who chose religion over him. He said he understood that she was in a difficult place at the time, but that didn't erase 45 years of absence. He wished her and me well, but asked that we not make contact again. The rejection devastated Lorraine in ways I had never seen before. She fell into a deep depression, began to question everything about her faith and choices. She stopped going to meetings regularly, something unthinkable for her. The elders noticed and started making visits, concerned about our spiritual state. We had to make vague excuses about health issues, but the questions continued. At 66, I find myself in a place I never imagined I would be. My wife, the woman who was my companion for over 4 decades, is sitting beside me right now, but there is a distance between us that never existed before. It is not a distance of anger or resentment, but of recognition. Recognition that we built our life on a foundation that was cracked from the start, hidden under layers of devotion and conformity. We still go to meetings occasionally, but it's not the same. I look around the Kingdom Hall and wonder how many other stories like ours are hidden behind those smiling faces. How many other secrets are buried beneath the surface of apparent spiritual perfection? How many other families have been sacrificed on the altar of organizational devotion? The organization that once gave me purpose and direction now feels like a gilded cage, beautiful on the outside, but limiting on the inside. Lorraine and I are trying to rebuild something new from what's left. I don't know if our marriage will survive this. I don't know if she will be able to forgive herself for what she did to Joshua, or if I will be able to reconcile the fact that the woman I loved hid something so fundamental from me for so long. But we are trying to be honest with each other for the first time, truly honest, without the mediation of doctrines or the fear of congregation judgment. It is scary and liberating at the same time. Sometimes, late at night, I pick up those yellowed photographs and look at that young girl holding her baby. I think of all the lives that could have been lived, all the paths not taken. I think of Joshua and his daughters, our grandchildren we will never know. I think of all the years Lorraine carried this weight alone, hiding her pain behind smiles at meetings and correct answers during studies. And I think of myself, how blind I was for so long, accepting an edited version of the truth because it was more comfortable than asking difficult questions. The truth, I've found, is not always liberating as we were taught. Sometimes it just hurts. But living a lie, even a well-intentioned lie wrapped in religious devotion, hurts even more. So here we are, 2 old people trying to figure out who we really are when all the layers of pretense are stripped away. I don't have easy answers, I don't have a happy ending to offer. I just have this story, this painful truth I discovered that September morning. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing it with you, I can help someone ask questions earlier than I did, to look beyond the surface before 40 years go by. Because in the end, we all deserve to live our lives based on truth, no matter how uncomfortable that truth may be.